And next up is putting the gear tower together to make sure that spins nice and freely, and that shouldn't be hard because these are pretty well engineered. We've got the first gear in place, and the instructions say to hold it on using one of these fiber washers and then a piece of the provided tubing. And I made sure to oil the bearings so that it spins pretty nice. Before I put the top gear on, I'm going to go ahead and install that onto the power truck to make sure everything's working as smooth as possible. One thing I did not realize is that only one of those truck frames is tapped for those long screws for the gearbox, so I'm going to have to switch a couple parts around. Okay, I've got the parts swapped around now. Did a free rolling test again just to make sure everything was still working right, and it is, which is good. So now I can put the gearbox on there. I found it's easiest to get it in place to start with one of the long screws on, then I can kind of angle in the gearbox and gear tower, and then start that other screw on top. Alright, I've got the tower on there now, and it is binding just a little bit. Gear mesh is just a hair too tight, so I cut this shim out of card paper, which I'll put under the gear tower, and that will hopefully get it working just the way it needs to. Got the paper shim in there now, and that seems to be just right. You still want to be able to roll the thing on a piece of track without it binding. And to make sure it works as well as possible, you want to have the gears completely parallel to each other so that the teeth mesh just right. So that just needs a little grease and some run time now. And I'll go ahead and install this gear. See how that works. That tightens it up a bit more. Yeah, seems to be alright. You can turn that easily by the shaft, which means the motor should be able to turn it just as easy. So that'll help it run really smooth. And I put just a little bit of oil in that bearing, and that freed it up quite a bit. So that runs real easily on that piece of track, just like it's supposed to. So now I can get to putting the actual chassis together. First thing that needs to be done before putting the chassis on is to put that link in there between the two trucks. You want that turning nice and smooth, no going side to side or up and down or anything like that. And then make sure that is lined up properly with the frame. This is also where that bit of slop in the shaft in the other truck comes in handy. You want it so that it's pushed all the way forward when the truck is straightened, so that way when it turns it has a little bit of room to slide outward. I think you can see that just a little bit, and that'll help it to go around curves quite a bit easier. The next thing that has to be done with the frame is to put these insulators in place in the truck holes. These are supposed to spin freely in there, and that one does not, so I'll have to open up the hole a little bit with a round file. And once that is spinning freely, but not loose, this big fiber washer goes around it, presses on top of there, which will probably take a hammer or something, I don't know. Okay, that's spinning nice and free now, and that fiber washer was actually just, the hole was just a little bit too small to fit that insulator, so I filed that out a bit too, but not much. and that fits around there real nice now. Okay, those fiber parts are fitting real good now, so next will be to put the motor in place. There are 2 screw holes there for mounting it. I'll use that one there. That should keep it a little more out of sight from the cab. And the motor is mounted with this larger screw here, which just goes in right there. Okay, I've got the motor in place, and the proper direction to make the thing go forward is to have it spinning in this direction. So that'll be this brush to the right rail, this one to the left rail. So that means this brush will have to go to the rear truck because that one's picking up from the right rail, and then the other one there. To make the electrical connections a little easier, I went ahead and soldered these terminals to the wires. I think these here are made by Atlas. They're actually for track, so they're a little bit large, but I think you can see there's plenty of open space in there, so that shouldn't cause any problem. As it turns out, mounting the motor in here properly has been the most challenging part of the kit so far. It's so large that it can't be shimmed up, and these screw holes have to be modified because the screw has to be absolutely flush with the bottom of the frame to not touch the truck. And I actually had to drill out the screw hole in the motor plate a little bit too. What I used is this cone-shaped drill bit here, which I was just fortunate enough to have, that kind of opened up a cone shape for the bottom of that screw head and made it fit in there just right. Okay, I've got the trucks put together, the motor's hooked up to them. I've got it on a piece of track there, so now I'll give it a quick test to make sure the motor is getting power. And it is. So now I just have to put the universal in there with the gear and a little bit of grease, and this thing will finally be ready for its first track test. And there it is. Famous Hobbytown chassis, all assembled and ready for a test run. And this thing is already really heavy, even without the metal body on there. So I bet once it's all assembled, it could pull a house down. Okay, I've got it on the track here. Let's see how it goes. That was a pretty smooth takeoff there, so that's a good sign. Pretty noisy, but that's to be expected with the Hobbytown chassis, especially with that big old motor in there. And there's 12 volts there. A little faster than realistic, but it's got 7.1 to 1 gearing, so I kind of expected that. Smooth though. That's only drawing about 1/4 of an amp on average, which is a lot better than I expected. Okay, so I think this portion of the assembly is basically all done, and that's the biggest thing with these, is getting the chassis going. And there it is, assembled for the first time. And that coupler box on the back was just about the right size for a KD158. Needed very little modification to hold the box. And it's even really close to the correct coupler height. I just need to put a little tiny shim inside the box and that'll be perfect. So that's really convenient. And now I'm just gonna run it for a while and break it in. Been running continuously like this for a while now, and it's not even breaking a sweat. Chassis may be an old design, but it sure is a good one. They don't make them like this anymore.